Today, London is one of the world's largest megacities, a financial and cultural capital of the 21st century, a city of glass, steel, and underground rail lines. But in the 17th century, London was a very different place. We know that London from engravings, paintings, maps, diaries, and official documents. Today, thanks to the capabilities of artificial intelligence, these sources can be more than simply observed. They can be brought to life. It was a city of dense wooden construction, narrow streets, open drainage ditches, and constant smoke from thousands of hearths. A city with a population of around 400,000 to 500,000 people, already an enormous figure by the standards of Europe at the time. At the beginning of the 17th century, London consisted of several clearly defined zones. Inside the old Roman and medieval walls lay the city, the commercial and financial heart of London. This was where guilds, banks, exchanges, warehouses, and the homes of wealthy merchants were located. To the west, along the Strand and toward Westminster stretched the royal and aristocratic districts. Here stood the royal court, parliament, and the main institutions of state. South of the Thames, in the area of Southwark, were theatres, brothels, bear-baiting pits and cheap taverns, a zone of entertainment deliberately placed beyond the formal boundaries of the city. The Thames was London's main artery. Every day, hundreds of vessels passed along the river, from ocean-going merchant ships to small barges and passenger boats. Goods from the colonies, sugar, tobacco, spices, textiles, were unloaded directly at the city's wharves. Warehouses, shipyards, and markets lined the riverbanks. The Thames was a source of wealth and at the same time a source of disease. Waste, sewage, and byproducts of crafts were dumped directly into its waters. London's street network remained largely medieval. Streets were narrow and winding, with houses whose overhanging upper floors almost touched above the roadway. Sunlight rarely reached ground level. Most buildings were constructed of wood, with thatched or wooden roofs. Open fire was used everywhere for cooking, heating, and craft production. Sanitary conditions were extremely poor. There was no sewer system in the modern sense. Waste was poured directly into the streets or into special pits. Smells were a constant part of urban life. Water was drawn from wells and rivers, often already polluted. These conditions created an ideal environment for the spread of disease. London's economy during this period was growing rapidly. The city was the centre of English and international trade. The first elements of a financial system were taking shape here: cargo insurance, promissory notes, joint stock companies. It was in London in 1600 that the East India Company was founded, an organisation that would soon become one of the main instruments of British colonial expansion. The city's population was highly heterogeneous. Merchants, bankers, and ship owners lived in spacious houses, often with their own warehouses. Artisans and labourers crowded into small apartments and attics. The poor, migrants, and hired workers lived in overcrowded districts, where several families might share a single room. Early 17th century London was a city of constant movement and tension. Every day, new people arrived in search of work and income. The city was growing faster than it could sustain itself. It was precisely within this overcrowded, overburdened environment that the events were brewing which, in the coming decades, would lead to one of the greatest catastrophes in the city's history. By the middle of the century, London had reached a dangerous threshold. Diseases flared up periodically. Fires occurred regularly. The city lived on, unaware that it would soon face trials that would permanently change its appearance and its fate. By the mid-17th century, London was the largest city in England and one of the most densely populated in Europe. Building density within the city walls had reached critical levels. In some districts, more than 200 people lived on a single acre of land. It was under these conditions that, in 1665, the city faced the last and most devastating outbreak of bubonic plague in its history. The first cases were recorded in the spring of 1665 in the parish of St. Giles in the Fields, an area inhabited by poor labourers and craftsmen. The disease quickly spread through the northern and eastern quarters of London. The main carriers were rats and fleas living in homes, warehouses, and along the wharves of the Thames. City authorities attempted to contain the spread of the infection. Houses in which plague cases were identified were boarded up. A red cross was painted on the doors along with the inscription, "Lord have mercy upon us." Residents were forbidden to leave. Guards stood watch at the doors, effectively turning buildings into prisons. These measures caused fear and panic. According to official records, up to 7,000 people were dying each week in London during the summer of 1665. Historians estimate that the real numbers may have been significantly higher. By autumn, the total death toll exceeded 100,000 people, around a quarter of the city's population. The poorest districts suffered most severely: Southwark, Whitechapel, Cripplegate. The royal court and wealthy residents fled the city. King Charles II went to Oxford. Parliament suspended its sessions. Theatres were closed. Trade collapsed. London was paralysed. By the winter of 1665 to 1666, the plague began to retreat. Cold weather destroyed flea populations, and the massive loss of life slowed the spread of the disease. The city began to return to life, but the recovery was brief. Less than a year later, London faced an even more destructive catastrophe. In the early morning of September 2nd, 1666, a fire broke out in the bakery of Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane. The flames quickly spread to neighbouring wooden buildings. A strong easterly wind fanned the fire. Within hours, it was out of control. Attempts to stop the spread of the fire proved ineffective. Narrow streets made it impossible to create fire breaks. Houses stood tightly packed together. Authorities hesitated to order demolitions, fearing legal consequences. By evening, the fire had engulfed a large part of the city. The fire raged for 4 days. It destroyed around 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, and most public buildings within the city walls. The old St. Paul's Cathedral burned to the ground. The Royal Exchange, guildhalls, warehouses, and markets were all destroyed. Around 70,000 people were left homeless. Many spent nights in fields outside the city or along the banks of the Thames. Despite the scale of destruction, only a few deaths were officially recorded, explained by the relatively slow spread of the fire and the possibility of evacuation. The fire wiped out nearly all of medieval London. The wooden city vanished. Archives, documents, and works of art were lost forever. But along with the destruction disappeared the main source of future epidemics: the dense, unsanitary urban environment. By the time the fire was fully extinguished on September 6th, London was a scorched wasteland. The city had lost its historic core, but gained a chance for complete transformation. From this moment begins the story of a new London, built of stone, regulated and redesigned from the ground up. After the Great Fire of 1666, London found itself in a situation unprecedented in its history. Almost the entire commercial and business centre had been destroyed. As early as September, King Charles II established a royal commission for the rebuilding of London. It included the leading architects, engineers and scientists of the time, among them Christopher Wren, Robert Hooke and John Evelyn. Christopher Wren proposed the most radical plan. It envisioned straight, wide streets, large public squares, a regular grid of blocks, and architectural unity inspired by Rome and Paris. The plan included embankments along the Thames, monumental avenues, and a clear, functional zoning of the city. However, fully implementing this vision proved impossible. The main obstacle was property rights. Land belonged to thousands of private owners, and redistributing plots threatened to delay reconstruction for decades. As a result, a compromise approach was adopted. The city was rebuilt within the framework of the existing street layout, but under fundamentally new building regulations. In 1667, Parliament passed the Rebuilding Act. The law prohibited the construction of wooden houses. All new buildings had to be built of brick or stone. 4 standard types of residential buildings were established, with strictly regulated heights and wall thicknesses. This became the first large-scale example of state regulation of urban construction in England. Special attention was paid to fire safety. Streets were widened wherever possible. Overhanging upper floors were banned. Roofs were made of tile or slate. For the first time, issues of building density and access to water were addressed systematically. The central project of the reconstruction was the new St. Paul's Cathedral. The old Gothic cathedral was completely dismantled. In 1675, construction began on a new building designed by Christopher Wren. Built of Portland stone, the cathedral became the largest architectural project in England at the time. Its dome, rising more than 110 meters, dominated the city skyline and served as a visual landmark for ships on the Thames. Construction was completed in 1710, after Wren's death, but this cathedral became the symbol of London's rebirth. At the same time, Wren oversaw the reconstruction of parish churches. In total, 51 churches were built or rebuilt. They varied in form but were united by a single architectural language, restrained, functional, and focused on proportion and light. These churches still shape the historic appearance of central London today. Commercial infrastructure was also restored. The Royal Exchange was rebuilt, guildhalls reopened. The Port of London quickly regained its trading volumes. By the 1670s, the city had once again become a key hub of international trade, serving routes to Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Changes also affected city administration. The experience of plague and fire led to tighter control over sanitary conditions. Although a full sewer system still did not exist, measures were introduced to clean streets, regulate markets, and move slaughterhouses outside residential areas. By the end of the 17th century, London's population once again exceeded 500,000 people. The city became the largest in Europe. Its urban fabric was more resilient and its infrastructure more manageable. London finally shed the characteristics of a medieval city and became an early modern capital. The catastrophes of the 17th century did not destroy London. They set the direction of its development for centuries to come. It was after the Great Fire that the principles of urban regulation, architectural planning, and administrative governance were formed, enabling London in the 18th and 19th centuries to become the capital of a global empire. Write in the comments which city and which era you would like to see in our next journey. And perhaps it will come to life in our next video. As always, see you in the past.